The following is a video series reviewing the top 20 most common bird species found in St. Joseph and Elkhart County of Indiana. The data was gathered from ebird.org, a website used to record bird sightings and observations. The report covers the past 10 years, 2010 to 2020, of observations in St. Joseph and Elkhart counties. It represents the most commonly reported, not necessarily the most abundant. This methodology helps to standardize the data between birds that travel in large groups and those that are more solitary. Coming in at number 15 is the European Starling, or the Sturnus vulgaris. The European Starling is part of the family Sternidae, or the starling family. The European Starling is distinguished from other blackbirds by their iridescent shades of blue, green, and purple all over their bodies and wings, with white speckled feather tips. No other blackbird in our region has that speckled set of feathers that almost seem to mimic the night sky of glistening stars. Their orange-yellow colored bill and orangish-yellow legs are also a great way to tell them apart from other blackbirds of our region. They are about 7.9 to 9.1 inches in length, and the sexes are similar. Here are some photographs of European starlings in the field. During non-breeding season, their beak does become a bit more drab, looking almost black, as seen on the starling on the suet feeder. It is also important to note that as juveniles, the European starling is browner in color without the iridescent colors or white speckles. Here's a map of the distribution of European starlings. European starlings are actually non-native to the United States. In the late 1800s, about 100 individuals were intentionally brought over from Europe, and they were released in New York City. Having no natural predators, the European starlings were quite successful in the United States. Only 50 years after they were introduced in New York, the European starling population spread rapidly and are now found in nearly every U.S. state and Canadian province. They are now considered an invasive species, meaning that their impressive populations have negatively impacted local populations of native species, in particular, cavity nesting birds like woodpeckers. Because they are an invasive species, the European starling is not protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, which is a piece of legislation that protects native birds. Just like everywhere else in the United States, starlings are a year-round resident to Indiana, and their numbers increase considerably here during the late winter and fall migration when younger starlings migrate in large flocks. European starlings are highly tolerant to human activity, which is one of the characteristics attributed to their great success in the United States. For this reason, you can find European starlings in urban and suburban areas such as backyards, parks, and cities, foraging on the ground or roosting in trees, on telephone wires, or utility towers. Another common place to see starlings is in open agricultural fields. Speaking of roosting, European starlings can create an impressively large flock roosting together during migration. They will even flock with other blackbirds, like common grackles, red-winged blackbirds, and brown-headed cowbirds. When not roosting in trees or on telephone wires, European starlings will spend time at feeders or foraging on lawns or agricultural fields. The call of the European starling is a complex, unrhythmic string of individual notes, rattles, and whistles of varying lengths and pitches. Their note quality sounds reminiscent to many non-avian sounds, like electrical frequency waves and rusty door hinges creaking. They also mimic other bird calls. When in large roosting groups, their harmony of sounds can make quite a boisterous sound. Let's take a listen. let's take a listen to one more example of their call. The European starling is an omnivore, meaning they eat both plants and meat. Their diet is very diverse, as they are considered generalists, eating most anything from invertebrates to smaller birds, small mammals, seeds, grains, and fruits, carrion or dead animals, and even discarded human waste from cities and landfills. Since they are not very picky eaters, European starlings will visit feeders. However, this is a bird that some people would rather not have at their feeders because they are an invasive species. Since they are an invasive species, recommendations for feeders will not be given. However, with that said, European starlings commonly forage on the ground, so a good way to keep starlings from your feeders is by purchasing no-mess birdseed or raking the ground below the feeders regularly. The European starling's average clutch size is 4 to 6 eggs. They use a cavity nest in tree trunks. Many times, they will not excavate the nest themselves, and instead will kick woodpeckers out of their home to use their cavity nest. Of course, this is not a bird that is in major trouble here in Indiana, but let's take a quick look at its worldwide status. In 2018, the European starling was considered least concern by the IUCN Red List. This means that the species population does not qualify as threatened or endangered. The European starling is highly tolerant to human activity and able to thrive in urban habitats. For this reason, it is believed that natural habitat degradation and their high tolerance to human activity has helped the species population survival considerably in the United States as well as other parts of the world. And what about the European starling's vulnerability to climate change? Remember, climate change is the term used to refer to the Earth's average increase in global temperatures in the last 50 years due to human activity. The temperatures rising just slightly, think only a few degrees, can have a massive impact on birds. Because the species is considered invasive to the Americas, the European starling's vulnerability to climate change was not assessed in the National Audubon Society's Survival by Degrees 389 Bird Species on the Brink report of 2019. Now let's review some other bird species that are commonly confused with European starlings in our region. Common grackles can be confused for European starlings. Grackles are also very common in Indiana, and they also will flock with groups of European starlings. There are some key differences between the two species. Although they both have some purplish-blue iridescence, the common grackle lacks the white speckled feathers that the European starling has all over its body. Also, the European starling has a yellowish straight bill most of the year, whereas the common grackle has a slightly curved black bill. Further, the common grackle has yellowish eyes, whereas the starling's eyes are black. Finally, European starlings are slightly smaller in size. Common grackles are typically 11 to 14 inches in length, and the starling is 7.9 to 9.1 inches in length. European starlings can be commonly confused for American crows. There are some key differences to look out for between these two species. Instead of orangish yellow legs and beak, the American crow has black legs and a black beak. Although they are both black, the American crow lacks the iridescence and the light speckled spots on its feathers that the European starling has. Finally, American crows are much larger than starlings, with a whopping length of 16 to 21 inches. European starlings can be confused for another blackbird found in Indiana, that is the red-winged blackbird. Although very similar in size, the best way to tell them apart is to look for the red patches on the wings of the red-winged blackbird. Brown-headed cowbirds is another common species to Indiana that can be confused for European starling. As adults, they can be more easily distinguished by looking for the brown head on the cowbird, which the European starling lacks. Also, look for the white speckled feathers on the starling and the yellowish colored beak. The tricky part comes when comparing the juvenile brown-headed cowbird to the juvenile European starling. Look for the length of the bill to determine which it is. The starling's bill is much longer than the conical-shaped bill of the cowbird. Now we will look at two other bird species that the European starling could possibly be confused for. These last two species are far less common than the others we just discussed. The first is the brewer's blackbird. As you can see in this photo, brewer's blackbirds are also black all over. However, the brewer's blackbird's eyes are yellowish in color, whereas the starling's eyes are black. Also, the bill size of the brewer's blackbird is much smaller than the long starling's bill. Finally, brewer's blackbirds lack the iridescent blue and purples and white speckled spots that is so prominent on starlings. Finally, we will compare the European starling to the rusty blackbird, which unfortunately has become increasingly less common in Indiana due to a decline in their species population. They look similar to European starlings, but there are some differences to look out for. Again, the eye color is different, just like on the brewer's blackbird. Also, the rusty blackbird will have more of a rusty colored plumage during the winter, which is how they got their name. Thank you for watching the video on number 15, the European starling, commonly found in St. Joseph and Elkhart counties of Indiana. For more information on other common birds found in this region, please visit SBEAudubon.org. The sources for this video are listed in the video description.